LinkedIn presents.
I'm Rufus Griscom.
And I'm Caleb Bissinger.
And this is The Next Big Idea. Today, is alcohol a virtue?
Is it a vice?
Or a little bit of both? So, Caleb, it was your birthday yesterday.
It was. Thank you for remembering.
And did you have a few drinks to celebrate?
I did. I maybe had too many, if I'm being honest.
Uh-oh. And you turned
33.
Right. Old man.
Thank you.
I could have done the math because I know you were born in 1991, which was a big year for me. It's when I graduated from college. And it's also when I saw a 60-minute segment that, I don't want to say it changed my life, but it definitely enhanced it.
Why is it that the French, who eat as much or more fat than we do, suffer fewer heart attacks, even though they smoke more and exercise less? The explanation of the paradox may lie in this inviting glass.
It's well documented that a moderate intake of alcohol prevents for coronary heart disease by as much as 50%. I mean, this is
50%?
50%.
When you say a moderate intake of alcohol with meals, what do you mean?
I mean a few glasses of wine per day. If you're just sticking to that, you will never get any adverse effect of this intake of alcohol.
You were not the only one influenced by that piece, Rufus. More than 20 million American households tuned in. And then they went wine shopping. Within a year, red wine sales shot up 39%.
And in the 3 decades that followed, the correlation between red wine and good health only seemed to get stronger. Studies showed red wine reduced dementia.
Scientists pointed out that red wine is rich in anti-aging polyphenols like resveratrol.
But then it all came crashing down.
No consumption, zero consumption of 0 ounces of alcohol is going to be better for your health than low to moderate consumption of alcohol.
That's neuroscientist and podcaster Andrew Huberman speaking near the end of a 2-hour episode in which he cuts down every argument that booze has benefits.
That episode, we should add, has been seen by more than 6 million people on YouTube. And Huberman is not alone in warning that a few glasses of wine a day most certainly does not keep the doctor away. Last year, the World Health Organization declared that no level of alcohol consumption is safe.
Ouch. The New York Times published a front-page story with the headline, "Even a little alcohol can harm your health."
GQ dubbed 2023, quote, "the year we realized any alcohol is bad for you."
And yet, a lot of people, myself included, can't bring ourselves to completely give up the sauce. Based on your revelry last night, Caleb, it sounds like you're having trouble with this too.
Guilty. Guilty as charged.
So today on the show, we will not only commiserate about this. No, today on the show, where does our taste for alcohol come from? What has it contributed to humanity? But also, what might we gain by giving it up?
This episode has a little bit of a different format. First off, an aperitif. Edward Slingerland, a philosophy professor at the University of British Columbia, is going to distill...
I see what you did there.
Thank you. Edward is going to distill his book, Drunk, How We Sipped, Danced, and Stumbled Our Way to Civilization, into a few key insights.
Then I'll speak with Susan Dominus, a staff writer for New York Times Magazine, about her recent viral story, Is That Drink Worth It to You?
And finally, a digestif. Rufus and I will talk about what we learned from Edward and Susan, the scientific research we'd like to see. And in our notes doc for this episode, Rufus, you wrote down, quote, 3 a.m. solo drinking. I'm not sure what that's a reference to, but I think we're probably going to talk about that too.
Oh boy, did I write that down? Mom, if you're listening, you might want to skip this one.
The LinkedIn Podcast Network is sponsored by TIAA. TIAA makes you a retirement promise, a promise of a guaranteed retirement paycheck for life. Learn more at TIAA.org/promisespayoff.
Hi, my name is Edward Slingerland. I'm professor of philosophy at the University of British Columbia, and I'll be talking to you about my new book, Drunk: How We Sipped, Danced, and Stumbled Our Way to Civilization. So the standard story we've been told about the origins of human alcohol making is that humans figured out agriculture at some point. We settled down and started growing crops. And then sometime after that, we noticed that if we left these grains sitting around in some water, it turned into something interesting to drink. And so we discovered things like beers as an accident, as a kind of side product of agriculture. When I started looking into the archaeological record, however, it looks like it's actually the other way around. So the beer before bread hypothesis is that it was actually the desire to get drunk, the desire to make chemical intoxicants that motivated humans to first settle down and start growing crops. And we see this not only in what's called the Fertile Crescent, this area of the Mideast where agriculture started, but in other areas. So other parts of the world, the first crops that are domesticated tend to be ones that are good at intoxicating you and not necessarily ones that are good for making food. We've been making and drinking intoxicants for a very long time. And these things are very dangerous. Alcohol is addictive. It hurts your liver. It raises your cancer risk. It causes all sorts of social problems. So given the enormous costs of alcohol, it just can't be the case that it's a mistake. And so there's got to be, for the taste for alcoholic beverages and other chemical intoxicants to stay in both our gene pool and our cultural repertoires for so long means that there must be some functional benefits that outweigh the costs. So what are these functions? One of them is creativity enhancement. So there's a widespread and ancient association of alcohol with creativity in the arts. And I review a body of very good empirical evidence that this is true, that actually alcohol helps us be more creative. So our ability to think laterally, to solve problems that require making big leaps, creative leaps, or connecting seemingly unrelated things, seems to improve with alcohol. It maxes out at about 0.08 blood alcohol content. So about when you shouldn't drive anymore, about 2 drinks in. And the mechanism of this seems to be the relaxation of control by the prefrontal cortex. So the PFC is the villain, the prefrontal cortex in my story. And the PFC is a very important part of our brain. It's very good. It's the center of what cognitive psychologists would call executive function or cognitive control. It's what allows us to stay focused, to remain on task, to delay gratification, do all the things that we have to do as grown-ups. The problem with the PFC is it allows us to focus in a laser-like fashion, but that's preventing us from seeing unusual things or making unusual connections. It makes us better at doing tasks, but it makes it harder for us to see connections and to connect unrelated things. And that's what creativity involves. And so if you look at, for instance, 4-year-olds have almost no PFC, which is why they can't tie their shoes and they can't get to school in the morning on time. But they wildly outperform adults on creativity tasks. And so I argue that one way to look at alcohol is it's a cultural technology for allowing us to temporarily regain the mind of a 4-year-old while still remaining adults. If you can, for 2 hours, turn down your PFC enough to start making creative connections and also feeling disinhibited, so you share these unusual ideas that you're having with other people, this is going to enhance both individual creativity and group creativity. So we shake hands. The practice of shaking hands is to show that we are not carrying a weapon in our dominant hand. So I shake hands with you. I don't have a knife. I don't have a dagger in my hand. For the same reason, we also, when we're negotiating a treaty historically or trying to have a truce in a conflict, we sit down and we do shots together. We drink together. And there's two mechanisms going on here. One is the same thing with creativity. We're turning down, alcohol down regulates or turns down the function of the PFC. And this has the effect of making it harder to lie, because lying requires cognitive control. You have to not blurt out the truth. It requires good working memory. You have to keep in mind the false thing that you're telling someone rather than just reading reality or consulting your memory. So it's much harder to lie when your PFC is impaired. It's also, this is maybe a little more counterintuitive, it's easier to detect lies when your PFC is downregulated. When we're trying consciously to detect lies, we're not very good at it. It turns out we look at the wrong cues. We tend to focus on the wrong things. And we do a better job when we just relax and kind of attend to a broader bandwidth of social information. The other function is the disinhibition. So the prefrontal cortex is in charge of inhibiting behavior. If you take it out, you're going to be seeing emotions and desires and thoughts that would normally get filtered by the PFC, by the conscious controlling mind. These things come out. And so we have a strong sense that when someone is drunk or at least mildly inebriated, we're seeing a truer version of them. And there's reason to believe that this is actually the case. Another thing that alcohol is doing is boosting endorphins and serotonins. And so this makes us like other people more. We find them more attractive. We find them funnier and smarter. And we also like ourselves more. We find ourselves funnier and more attractive when we've been drinking. And this helps with sociality. It helps people get past inhibitions in terms of just confidence, social confidence, but it also increases, I review some empirical evidence that it increases interpersonal bonding. It increases the sense of being part of a group and having a group identity. And this had, I argued, very important functions over the course of our history.
You know what I love about this, Caleb? Slingerland is doing something pretty unfashionable and I think contrarian, making this multi-pronged argument that alcohol has had a net positive impact on humanity. That's not an easy case to make given all the liabilities that alcohol brings with it.
And we should say we're going to talk about some of those liabilities when you sit down with Susan. But no, I think you're right. There is something contrarian, right? That he's taking this kind of evidence-based look at the anthropological record and finding all these benefits that alcohol brought to society. You know, I've been thinking about that great Churchill quote. You know, he said he got more out of alcohol than alcohol ever took out of him. Yep. And I think Edward Slingerland sort of thinks that's the case for all of humanity, right? That of course, alcohol has had plenty of drawbacks, but, you know, it's given us a lot. Like the Egyptians who built the pyramids drank a gallon of beer every day, right? The founding fathers who wrote our Constitution started their mornings with hard cider. At the Manhattan Project, they had martini parties every night, and they were scribbling down like essential formulas to creating the first atomic bomb on cocktail napkins.
Astonishing.
So there's all these amazing feats that have been achieved under the influence. You know, does that mitigate or justify the downsides? No, I don't think Slingerland would say it does, and I don't think I feel it does either, but yeah.
I love that Edward says flat out, the prefrontal cortex is the villain in my story. Yeah. Right? I mean, our PFC provides us with laser-like focus, which is useful, but it impedes creativity, he argues, and it impedes social connection. So when I suggest that we get a drink at the end of the day, I'm basically saying, I think I'm in the mood to downregulate my PFC, right? Are you ever in the mood to downregulate your PFC?
Yeah, I mean, I was last night. And, you know, look, like, I'm not thinking that consciously, right? I mean, imagine how much of a nerd you would be if you were like mixing a cocktail and you're like, I am now going to downregulate my PFC. But I think what's really cool about that framing is it gives us sort of a scientific explanation or justification for what we all sort of intuitively know happens when we drink, right? We feel more at ease with each other. We feel more comfortable in our own skin. We feel maybe a little brighter, a little funnier, a little more relaxed. And he's saying, here's why those sensations occur. And again, I think we should point out, like, that may be true for me, it may be true for you. It's certainly not true for everyone. And I know plenty of people who do not have these experiences when they drink alcohol, right? They feel anxious, they feel irritable, they feel depressed. So it's your mileage may vary situation, but I have definitely firsthand experienced some of those down-regulating benefits, and it sounds like you have too. But here's a question for you, Rufus. Like, Edward talks about using alcohol to do either some creative problem solving or to help like in a negotiation. I wonder, do you have like a story or an experience of that in your own life?
Oh, interesting question. I think I've found shared drinking of glasses of wine or beer to be a trust accelerator.
Yeah.
And this has helped. You have to accelerate trust if you're going to engage into a serious business relationship, whether it be a partnership between two companies or deciding to work together for what might turn out to be years at a time. I'm not sure I can identify a specific creative epiphany on the spot, but certainly like boozy conversations have helped me elevate emerging unconscious convictions to the conscious level, right? I mean, you can have the sense that, oh gosh, we should shift our business strategy. And I can maybe have an emerging conviction. You and I might both have that conviction, but having a few rounds might help us bring that into consciousness and accelerate that process.
That makes a lot of sense. I was listing earlier like a couple of the amazing things that were accomplished under the influence, like the pyramids and the Constitution. But the greatest of all time, a few drinks in, back of the cocktail napkin invention ever, right?
What's that? What's that?
Shark Week. That's how they came up with Shark Week. The executives from whatever network, Discovery or something, went out for some drinks, got a little tipsy, and one of them was just like, what if we did a whole week about sharks? True story.
Well, this is very clear evidence that alcohol has been essential to the advancement of civilization. It's hysterical. All right. So the desire to drink drove civilization, but that doesn't mean it's good for our health.
Yeah. And I think that tension is at the heart of that recent New York Times Magazine story by our next guest, Susan Dominus. Rufus, why don't you start by telling listeners just a little bit about that piece, why you wanted to invite Susan on the show, why you wanted to talk about it?
Absolutely. Well, Susan and I go way back. She was the editor-in-chief of Nerve.com, the online magazine I co-founded way back in 1997. And a few weeks ago, her New York Times Magazine piece, Is That Drink Worth It to You?, was forwarded to me by a friend. And as you may know, Caleb, I have become annoyingly focused in my 50s on improving my health. And yet I have struggled to reduce my drinking. And all this negative clinical and epidemiological data on the health impact of drinking has been, let's say, it's been unwelcomed, right? I've been struggling to fully understand it.
Yeah.
And Susan's piece, in which she interviewed some of the scientists at the center of this conversation, really helped to put it all in perspective.
All right, well, let's listen. You began by asking Susan if she remembers that 60-minute segment that we played at the top.
Susan, in November 1991, 60 Minutes ran a segment called The French Paradox, espousing the health benefits of red wine. And in 1992, sales of red wine in the U.S. rose almost 40%. Totally astonishing. I remember reading about this at the time. Do you remember this moment? And I think you were conveniently just arriving at legal drinking age.
That's exactly right. I had just turned 21. And I think it would be more accurate to say I don't remember a time when I wasn't under the impression that red wine was good for your heart. Like that just seemed like a given. And I took it to the bank and, indulged quite happily in a glass of red wine with dinner, feeling like I was like flushing out all kinds of toxins or extending my life. So yeah, I think that is probably when that idea really took hold for tons and tons of people.
I remember reading an article in the New York Times in, I think it was like the mid-90s, citing this kind of 30 to 40% reduction in heart disease if, as a male, I drank 1 to 2 glasses of red wine. The 1 to 2 piece I remembered very clearly. And I used to joke that I had that article framed above the bar in our apartment. So as you say, I took it to the bank.
Yeah.
And so many of us did for, a good decade plus. And then more recently, the scientific consensus has changed. What happened?
Basically, what happened is that a couple of researchers took a really good look at the way that the studies were categorizing different kinds of drinkers. And they realized that people who maybe did drink at one time in their life, but then had stopped, were being put into the abstainer category. Now, why do people tend to stop drinking? Usually it's because, or one of the main reasons is because they fall really ill or they're having hard times in other ways, but they're not people who are like casually having a glass of wine with dinner anymore. And those people made the moderate drinkers look healthy by comparison. And it's not that the moderate drinking was making them healthier per se. It's just that they looked healthier because there wasn't this confound of the people who were quite sick. When they recategorized the research and reanalyzed it, what they started to find was, oh yeah, maybe moderate drinking is not actually good for your health.
A devastating sequence of words in your article. Last year, a major meta-analysis that re-examined 107 studies over 40 years came to the conclusion that, quote, no amount of alcohol improves health. Ireland, you also write in your article, became the first country to pass legislation requiring a cancer warning on all alcohol products sold there, saying there's a direct link between alcohol and fatal cancers. It's worth pointing out that in Ireland, I think the Public Health Agency still defines low-risk drinking as 17 drinks a week for men and 11 for women.
Oh, interesting. I didn't see that. Yeah, that's a lot of drinks. Yeah.
But I think that's changing, right? I mean, the whole global understanding of the relationship between alcohol and health has radically changed, it seems.
You know, it's interesting because the WHO has definitely been trumpeting the links between cancer and alcohol for a very long time. But as you can probably imagine, it's much harder to get that public messaging across than the idea that like a glass of wine or two, of red wine a day or two is good for your health. Like I think it literally just never really took.
Well, apparently it's taken a long time to break through for me. It's confusing for me because I've generally been celebrating all the great health news of the last decade. You know, coffee is good for you. Fantastic. I should sleep more in a dark, cool room. Wonderful. It's healthy to be cold, I've read, in recent years. And it's also healthy for us to take a sauna 5 days a week. Oh. Fantastic. I love it. Susan, I'm in. Quality time with friends is literally life extending. Say no more. Wonderful. Sign me up, right? Spending time appreciating art and reading novels is good for our brains and our mental health, right? That's just been, I've joked for years that I have a file called Scientific Studies That Support the Life I Want to Live Anyway.
I love that file.
All of this news fits in that file, but this alcohol research, as hard as I try, I have not been able to fit it in to the file. It seems to me that many people have been really discouraged by this sort of most recent wave of news about the science. Is this in part why you wrote this article? What was it that prompted you to write this piece?
What prompted me to write this piece is sort of what I'm hearing you say right now, right? Like, maybe you're a maximalist, Rufus, right? Like, it's not enough for you that alcohol not be all that bad for you. Like, you want it to be good for you. Like, I think what a lot of the research is saying is not so much that, like, good God, alcohol is going to kill you or it's going to obliterate your brain cells. It's going to, you're almost destined for heart disease. That's not what the research is saying. All it's saying is, if you think it's going to make you healthier, it's not. But at the same time, it's, we have a very binary way of looking at health statistics. And so when my friend whose house I'm sitting in right now, as a matter of fact, told me that she'd stop drinking alcohol altogether because of all the research in the news, I kind of thought, but does the research really say you need to stop drinking altogether? Like, is it really, really bad for you, or is it just not good for you? And I think the answer is, yeah, sure, it's not great for you. But when you really look at the numbers, and even Tim Stockwell, who did this really big analysis, when you talk to him about how it translates into your actual life, again, I'm not like an alcohol pusher by a long stretch. And I'm sure we'll talk about all the many downsides. But being told that something's not good for you is not the same thing as saying you must not do this thing under any circumstances. And if you do, you should feel guilty.
I actually had a friend this morning tell me that she saw the headline of your piece in the New York Times, "How Bad is Drinking for You Really?" And she didn't read it because she didn't want any more bad news. She was filtering her news, right?
My friend was heading to Ireland on vacation, and she was like, I will read that article when I get back from Ireland. And I wanted to say to her, no, it's not what you think. I mean, most scientific studies tend to say things like this thing that you're doing increases your risk by 22%, 23%, 30%. But if your baseline risk is very low, then 20% on top of whatever that baseline risk doesn't really get you into a much more scary place.
So what is the risk for someone, let's say, who's drinking one glass of wine a night? What kind of risk are we talking about?
So the way that Tim Stockwell, he's one of the authors of that major study that found that there was no amount of alcohol that doesn't cause harm. But Tim is a scientist at the Canadian Institute for Substance Use Research. And the way he explained it to me is like this. He said, look, if you, Sue, who's drinking 6 or 7 glasses of wine a week, compared to someone who's just having 1 or 2, you've now increased your risk by a factor of 10, right? So that sounded really intense and, like what bad judgment
brutal.
I'm showing,
Yeah,
brutal.
Sure.
But he said, even still, when you do that math, your total, lifetime risk of dying prematurely of an alcohol-related cause is still only at about 1%, which is not that scary.
Another data point that you share in your article is that I think you said that if you drink a glass of wine a night, it would add up on average to, I believe it was 2.5 months of a reduction in the length of your life. Obviously, this is like macro data.
That's
right?
exactly right.
And so it's going to vary for individual, but that's the rough average if it's a drink a night at 2.5 months.
That's what I was told. And and that was really a revelation to me because I did feel like, if I were somebody who got a lot of pleasure out of alcohol, that losing 2.5 months, like, dying at, 93 and a half rather than, 93 and 3/4, whatever that is, like, it didn't feel so consequential to me. Some of my friends have joked and said, but who wants those last 2.5 months anyway? But what I don't think they realize is it's not that you are spared those 2.5 months of illness. They just come earlier, probably.
That's right. And so Susan, how has the reaction been to your article? I mean, I know it's been very highly read and forwarded. I forwarded it to a dozen friends. What are you hearing from people?
I think they're relieved, actually, most of the time.
Yeah.
I think Stockwell, when he says things like, look, it'll take 2.5 months off your life, or it'll, it's likely to reduce your lifespan by a number of weeks or a number of years. I think it makes him nervous a little bit, was my sense, because that you cannot take to the bank. Like, he's not promising you that's all it's going to be. There's a huge range and you don't know where you're going to fall in that range. We're talking about averages, as you say, over mass numbers of people. But I think it was a helpful context for people to hear.
I was interested to see all the comments in the New York Times on the website. Quite a few kind of lyrical, really kind of beautiful comments of people who clearly have been struggling with this sense that, like, gosh, this is a part of my life that I enjoy. Someone from Lisbon said, I'll take a sub 1% marginal health risk in exchange for the boundary melting effects of alcohol that allowed me to gather the courage to find, connect with, and eventually marry a loving spouse.
Aww.
I'll take it for the lively, louder than reasonable, meandering, laughter-filled, or passionate dinner conversations with family. Now, obviously, we have to say that, alcohol can be extremely dangerous and has had devastating impacts on many, many, many people. But it does seem to play a positive role in the lives of quite a few people if approached moderately. So there has been, I think, a lot of hand-wringing, and your sober-minded analysis in this piece, I think, was quite well received.
I will say that what was news to me was how closely connected alcohol is to crime. I think
Yes.
I had, a better appreciation of context for the actual risk to yourself. But it is kind of like you were also partaking in this general phenomenon that is linked to, as you say, so many social ills. So just to cite one study, meta-analysis found that 48% of homicide offenders had consumed alcohol before the crime, and 37% were intoxicated during the offense. So, there's a huge body of, kind of criminologists and epidemiologists who think that if we increased the alcohol tax, for example, you would see a dramatic crime reduction, and you wouldn't have to put any more, there'd be fewer people you were putting in prison, there'd be less homicide, it would be economically beneficial. So it's amazing what a massively complicated subject it really is when you think about all the social roles that it plays in our lives.
I don't know about you, Susan, but so many of my friends, most of whom are in their 50s, are doing all the right things right now with their health, or trying to, daily exercise, improving their diets, sleep trackers. But the cutting out the booze part or cutting down the booze is the most difficult challenge for them. Why do you think it's so difficult for so many of us?
Well, first of all, for many people, it's like, it's a 20-year habit, right? Like your eating habits change over time. But I think, by the time you're 50 years old, if you're somebody who has a glass of wine with dinner or is, customarily having two with friends when you're out, first a cocktail, then a glass of wine with dinner, I just think it's very hard to break that habit. I mean, alcohol is, by the way, a little bit addictive or a lot addictive.
Yes, exactly.
Your tolerance does grow over time. People tend to drink, especially women, more as they get older. Maybe you have more money to spend on it, or maybe your tolerance is higher. And the other reason is obviously just it's social. It's a social right. It's something you don't say to somebody, hey, let's get together over a bowl of soup. I mean, maybe people do, but most of my friends say, let's go get a drink. And then when you go get a drink, first of all, maybe it's in the day. So as we all know, our willpower is depleted by the end of the day. That's when you're trying to make up your mind. Am I going to have the drink? Am I not going to have the drink?
Yes.
And you want to commune with this person. It's really not fun being the person who's like, no, you have a glass of wine. I'm going to get like a seltzer and cranberry. There's a small unspoken social pressure. And it's a signifier that you are now relaxing, whether you actually are or not. I mean, there's some studies that have found there's a placebo effect and that your relaxation level increases kind of the minute you are holding the glass of wine in your hand, that it's not even like the alcohol that triggers it. And by the way, I think that's the category of person I fall into. Like, I really love that moment when we're across the table and there's a glass of wine in front of me. I feel civilized. I feel adult. I feel a little bit elegant. I mean, this is all like, this is all like the swindle of marketing and Sex in the City. Years of watching Sex in the City. I recognize that I'm a product of somebody's like capitalist dream here, but that is, for me, that is like a really nice moment. And it's after I've had the first or second glass of wine that I'm no longer like so happy about it.
I love something you said on the daily podcast. You said, when people reach for a drink, and here you are again saying reach for a drink, like before they've actually are holding the drink, it's another way of saying, I want to be in this moment with you and turn off the part of my brain that's worrying or self-conscious. There's a kind of commitment of sorts, right? And an expression of intent. I've always thought of drinking as a form of voluntary stupidity. Right?
I love that.
That we're like we're choosing to be less smart to some degree because by that having multiple narratives happening simultaneously in your head results in a lot of self-criticism and a lot of excess analysis, and just dumbing yourself down makes it easier to some degree, to become more patient, more connected, more in the moment. So I almost think of it as a critique of intelligence. What do you think about that?
I think another way of saying that is, I feel good enough around you and trust you enough already that I'm going to let you see my less controlled self. In other words, when you're at a party and you have clearly had a drink or two, it can actually, it can be threatening in the wrong circumstances, but it can also be we all know it, very endearing, and in a way we drink sometimes because we don't feel comfortable. So it could read as like a crutch, but it could also read as a deliberate decision to be more relaxed in front of somebody you don't know that well. Like, I'm going to let down my defenses here. Look, I have a drink in my hand. Maybe it's even my second drink. Maybe you can tell from the way I'm talking or laughing that like I'm trusting you with this version of me.
And it seems that like in our younger years, I think it was certainly true for me that my social anxiety was probably at a peak in my teens. I imagine that's true for many people. And it's probably subsided ever since, right? I mean, I think that always just struck me as one of the benefits of getting older, right? Right? Is that maybe that we become less afraid of other people. And so it strikes me that maybe the utility of alcohol as a social lubricant is in proportion to how much social anxiety one is experiencing, right? So if I'm not experiencing a lot of social anxiety, maybe I shouldn't need the alcohol. And yet I feel that I do, Susan. It's so hard for me to, I've been cutting back. I used to be a kind of 2 drinks a night person looking after my heart, of course, going for that 35% reduction in heart-related illness. But I've now made a policy of saying I'm only going to drink when I'm among other people in a social environment.
Oh.
And I've had to share with my wife the really unfortunate news that I cannot consider hanging out with my wife to be a social environment because that's always the case. But I have found it to be difficult, even though I think intellectually it shouldn't be necessary. And maybe a lot of it's associative. Maybe a lot of it has just become a habitual thing that I've maybe it's the memories and the habit that I like more so than the actual effects.
Well, I'm curious, what do you think is the reason? Like, is it like when you want to have a couple of drinks, are you looking to feel more relaxed? Is it the taste of it that you like? Is it the whole experience? Like, what is it that you would miss if you didn't?
Yeah, unfortunately, I like all of it. I really enjoy every piece of it. But I think it's, I love drinking 2 or 3 cups of coffee or espresso in the morning. And I love sort of revving up my brain. And I also like decelerating it and downshifting and slowing down at the end of the day. And I think a glass of wine or 2 has become my process of doing that. And I like doing it ritualistically with friends and with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I like experiencing a neurochemical transition with other people in a parallel way that we can all enjoy, So unfortunately, there are quite a few things that I like about it.
It sounds pretty positive to me, actually. I mean, I think it's because I also, after I wrote the article, I thought, well, I don't like alcohol that much. It's not going to be that hard to cut back. And I also was surprised by how hard it was to cut back. It was June. I had twin boys who were graduating from high school. So there were like 9 million graduation parties. There were other kind of annual neighborhood parties that I love. And unfortunately, my husband lost his mom that month as well. So it was a very emotionally intense month that coincided with a lot of parties. And I think I just felt like at 6 or 7 or 8 o'clock, I just was like, well, I did sort of feel like, this will make me feel better, more relaxed, happier. And for me, actually, it doesn't necessarily have that effect, but what else does, right? Like that's the thing that's supposed to do that thing. And so I think I kept reaching for a drink because I thought it would make me feel more relaxed and happy. And that's what I was looking for.
Right. And so you feel that in your case, it's sort of false advertising, that it doesn't deliver what you hope it will.
I keep expecting it to. I mean, I have for years. And I think I did have a different relationship to it when I was younger, for sure. But now, especially, it doesn't have the effect that I want. I can get a little bit like fuzzy or a little bit tired or a little bit maybe even, honestly, after 2 glasses of wine. If I drink 2 full glasses of wine, I almost always get a little bit like depressed, actually.
Certainly, the role that alcohol has played in my life has evolved over time. I mean, certainly, if I look back at my own life, some of my closest friendships, when I think back on all the shared experiences, having, a few too many drinks, those are highly memorable experiences in those relationships. Certainly, looking back at romances, there was usually some drinking involved prior to the beginnings of those romances. Of course, it must be said that before the advent of alcohol, Homo sapiens still pair bonded and successfully procreated. Clearly,
amazing.
It's not right, astounding. It's not necessary. But when I catalog really close relationships, for better or for worse, alcohol has been present in some of the most memorable bonding moments in those relationships. I do feel as I get older that that's perhaps less necessary, and there are other ways to have those experiences. Again, as I was saying earlier, I think this sort of shared vulnerability and symmetry of experience is also available if you, let's say, like go hiking, right, or go on a camping trip with a group of people.
Yeah,
I think there's a sense of that shared vulnerability and shared risk taking and shared adventure is, for me anyway, part of the bonding experience, and that need not. I want to keep repeating to myself that need not involve alcohol at all.
I mean, it's funny when I think about my more recent adult friendships that I formed in the past, 20 years, really. Many of them, for better or for worse, have been shaped by our common experience of the consciousness altering experience known as parenting, and there was so much shared horror, joy, trauma, fear, anxiety, laughter, and also just a lot of opening up. And that sort of, and of course, like there isn't such a great place for alcohol in parenting, if you're at all a little bit of a worrier, which I am. So I think that's, because I've been reflecting on what you said, and I definitely think, well, my oldest friends, I definitely think alcohol has played a big role. But as an adult, I think it's come from other kinds of shared experiences.
The LinkedIn Podcast Network is sponsored by TIAA. In the last 100 years, we've seen financial markets swing, new currencies come and go, decades of savings lost in days, all showing that a retirement plan without a guarantee, quite simply, isn't enough. So more than a retirement plan, TIAA makes you a retirement promise. A promise of a guaranteed retirement paycheck for life. A promise that pays off. Learn more at TIAA.org/promisespayoff.
From LinkedIn News, I'm Leah Smart, host of Everyday Better, an award-winning weekly podcast dedicated to personal development. Whether you're looking for ways to shift your mindset or seeking more fulfillment in your life, we've got you covered.
You can build internal resources. That's what the study of psychology is about, building internal resources.
Turning towards is one of the most important elements of successful relationships, no matter what kind of relationship it is.
The thing that underpins all of this productivity stuff is finding a way to make the journey itself enjoyable. The journey is the destination.
The beauty of uncertainty is infinite possibility. When you don't know what's next, you don't know what's next. And thus, anything can be next.
Join me as we dive into captivating stories and research-backed ideas that have empowered me and others to lead lives with more clarity and intention. Everyday Better, making growth an everyday practice. Listen to Everyday Better on the LinkedIn Podcast Network, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I want to quickly tell you about the Next Big Idea Club's BookBox subscription. Every quarter, we get our friends Malcolm Gladwell, Adam Grant, Susan Cain, and Daniel Pink to pick the 2 best new works of nonfiction. And then we send them to our subscribers. If you sign up, you'll also get access to beautiful audio and video e-courses, invitations to exclusive AMAs with top authors, membership in our LinkedIn community, and VIP access to our live events. Plus, you'll be helping us continue to make this show. So if this is at all interesting to you, go to nextbigideaclub.com, learn more, and if you do end up subscribing, use the promo code PODCAST at checkout to get 20% off. That's nextbigideaclub.com, promo code PODCAST.
What do you think about the creative benefits of alcohol? I mean, certainly like there's a subset of writers and artists and creators for whom their relationship with alcohol has been part of their process.
Yeah, I loved your podcast on this subject. And I was fascinated to hear Slingerland say that he wrote some really great sentences when he'd had like this delicious Negroni. I can't open my laptop if I've had like a drink and a half. I mean, I spoke to a friend of mine who's a novelist recently to ask her, very accomplished novelist, and to say, did you ever write with a little alcohol? I mean, she's like, what? Absolutely not. Like never, would never, ever, 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 ever happen, which I thought was super interesting. But I just don't know anybody who writes fiction. Do you know anybody who writes fiction while drinking alcohol now?
No, I would think more of nonfiction, although I have
even worse. There's facts involved. How does
So I have a friend who's a very accomplished nonfiction writer who says that he's written many of his most lyrical sentences and come up with his best metaphors very consistently after drinking. But the editing critically happens for him sober.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I'm tempted to try it, I guess. But for me, it's coffee, because what happens, there's two times when I think I do some good thinking. One is I write in that first 2 hours when I've had my coffee, because things are zinging. I'm making connections that I wouldn't normally make. And I'm feeling hopeful about solving a problem in an interesting, creative way. And I'm excited, I'm kind of like alive. But also, and this is, I think, a different kind of downregulation, is often I wake up and I lie in bed and I think about writing a paragraph in my head. And it's like you're right in between this like dream state and the awake state. And I find that to be a pretty creative space also.
Oh, I totally agree. Yes, that state when you've just woken up is a really sort of fecund, creative space. I was fascinated to read that Nicholson Baker, the novelist, apparently had a practice, I think, when he was writing novels, that he would set his alarm for 3 a.m. and wake up and write for an hour and then go back to sleep.
Yeah.
And wake up again with his family and, have breakfast and then write again. But he wanted to, he found that just having woken up state to be so creatively fertile that he wanted to experience it twice every morning.
Oh, that's, yeah. See, I can relate to much more than I can relate to the idea that having a strong Negroni would help me write a better sentence. I have to admit, I am slightly tempted to try.
But but this reminds me of the fact that like we're all sort of slightly neurochemically different.
Yeah, I mean, I'll admit to you that the first draft of my alcohol piece was much more about the downsides of alcohol. I didn't have a paragraph that was an ode to like all the wonderful things that alcohol does for people. Because I think personally for me, I actually might consider, like if I could trade, if somebody could say to me, okay, we're going to eliminate all the bad things that happened on evenings. There was a lot of alcohol involved in your life, but you also have to lose the good things. I think that's a bargain I would actually take, personally.
Yeah.
And also, the back and forth I was having with my editor, he is somebody who is more like you, like really, really, really enjoys the taste of alcohol, the way it makes him feel. And at the end of the day, I know that it is a thing that people feel, but I'm not neurochemically primed for that. I have a cousin who's like deathly allergic to it, actually. And I think somewhere in our like family, my parents really barely ever drank ever, not out of any kind of like consciousness. It just wasn't something that interested them. My sister doesn't touch it. So I just think I'm not somebody who like, I almost feel like, I'm not mourning this, but I do think I'm missing out a little bit on whatever it is that it does for other people.
Well, you actually sent me a study this morning that indicated that there was confirmation that when at least one party in a group was drinking, that it increased the social interaction, right? So that you could be the person with the glass of wine with water in it, and I could be the person drinking actually a nice Bordeaux, and perhaps we would have the same benefit of increased social engagement. I
like to think so. Yeah, that seems like it would work for me pretty well.
So you think you're headed for a zero drinking zone?
So I got through June. It was a very intense month. And then in July, I started having trouble sleeping. And so I was like, it's been so bad that I was like, okay, I can't mess around with anything. I'm not having coffee afternoon, and I'm definitely not drinking. And what is amazing to me is how quickly I really went quite far the other way. Like I never had a very high tolerance, but now it's like very, very low. And the taste of alcohol it does sort of feel toxic to me all of a sudden. I wouldn't be surprised if I did lapse, but I think the days of my husband and I having always like a bottle of wine in the house, and we almost always have, a glass I used to have a glass of wine when I made dinner at 6:30, turn on Market Watch, kind of the, chopping block and glass of wine. I think those days are over for me, probably.
I'm trying not to drink at all during the week. And my policy is if I'm not at a social gathering with friends, no drink at all. That's what I'm going for.
So interesting. Yeah.
But I applaud, or I'm sorry, you go.
Well, I just was going to say again, like obviously better not to drink anything than to drink something.
Yeah.
But you're not in like mortal peril if you have a couple of drinks a night. I mean, given like you're a tall person,
Yeah, look, I'm definitely willing to exchange 2 to 6 months of my life.
Yeah.
I'm willing to accept the 1% risk because I do get a lot of joy out of having glasses of wine with friends.
Yeah.
And so I think it'll always be part of my life. But I want it to be a choice that is thoughtful and not just an automatic ritual.
I think that's, we appreciate everything better when that's the case, I think.
Well, thank you, Susan Dominus, for being with us today. Such a lovely conversation.
Totally my pleasure. So fun to talk to you about it.
What were your impressions, Caleb?
The thing that really resonated with me that Susan said pretty early in the conversation is that so much of our thinking around alcohol is binary, maybe too binary. And I like the sort of sensibility that she brings to it. I like that she says, like, let's turn the temperature down. Like, is alcohol good for your health? No, it's not. But does that mean that you can't continue to enjoy it in a reasonable way as long as you know that it is going to have some potential negative consequences and you have to sort of do that cost-benefit analysis? I thought that was really great. She just takes the temperature down on this conversation. What about you? What were your impressions?
Well, I love that. I love that she called me out as a maximalist who wants to both enjoy drinking and know that it's good for me at the same time. That might be a little greedy of me, honestly, to ask her both of those things. But I was fascinated by her ambivalence about the effects of booze, right? Which is clear evidence that, as you said earlier, people have very different responses. And I've noticed both different responses to the buzz and to the hangover.
Yes.
And furthermore, I think for a lot of people, our response to alcohol changes over time.
Yeah, no, I think it does change over time. I mean, as we talked about at the top of the show, I'm in my early 30s now, and absolutely the way that a few drinks affects my body the next day is so different than it was a decade ago, and has really caused me to change how I think about how I drink, why I drink, how much I want to drink, what my relationship with drinking should be as I continue to age.
I do not experience meaningful hangovers unless I really get carried away. But what does happen if I have more than, let's say, 2 to 3 drinks is that I just feel incrementally stupider in the next morning, right? Like 10 to 20% stupider, which in my case is unacceptable, right? And the older I get, the less acceptable it is.
Okay, let's get to something you had in your notes and then tried to delete, but I caught you. You wrote down 3 a.m. solo drinking. What was that all about?
Well, all right, you're keeping me honest here. So once in a while, I'd say every 1 to 2 weeks, I wake up around 3 a.m. And I'd say every couple times this happens, I'm unable to get back to sleep. Like I try everything. I read my novel. I have some chamomile tea. I just cannot for the life of me get to sleep. And there's only one thing that I know will just about guarantee that I will return to a state of peaceful slumber. And that is a couple glasses of red wine, ideally a Bordeaux. And here's the funny thing. I just relish it, just the absolute silence. Sometimes I see a little bit of light emerging in the sky. And I tend to kind of sometimes feel this sense of existential bliss and kind of deep gratitude. And I totally get that people experience existential angst. I certainly do at times. But the other side of existential angst is existential bliss, the sense of just amazement at the state of being alive, of existing. And somehow for me, that is amplified by 2 to 3 glasses of Bordeaux at 3 a.m.
Wow. That sounds very tranquil. I might have to try that next time I'm up in the middle of the night and can't get to sleep. Let's get practical. So let's talk about how our own approaches to drinking have evolved. I think thanks in large part to the conversations you've had on the show.
Yeah.
I was looking at the comment section under Susan's article on the Times, and one of the most popular comments comes from a doctor who says, quote, "I tell my patients even a small move in the right direction is good. Drink a little less, eat a little better, exercise a little more." And that's sort of my philosophy. That's kind of where I'm at.
Yep.
You know, I'm trying to eat a little better, inspired by folks like Casey Meads we've had on the show, drink a little less, inspired by conversations like the one we heard today, move a little more, inspired by people like Peter Attia, Kelly McGonigal. You know, it doesn't have to be gigantic life changes, no alcohol, exercise 100 hours a week, and, you know, but just marginal gains. That's kind of where I'm at. And so I've definitely tried to get myself to a place where, for the most part, on weekdays, I'm really trying not to drink, you know, and then on the weekends can have a few glasses with friends or with my wife or by myself at 3 a.m.
I'm doing something kind of similar, which is I'm trying not to drink when not with company, and my wife doesn't count. Sorry, honey. And I'm also trying to put in place this policy of stopping drinking at least 2 hours before bedtime, ideally 3. I really see this directly in the data on my heart rate and sleep quality is profoundly impacted by the proximity of my drinking to my sleep. There's a somewhere between 10 and 25% elevation of my heart rate during the full 8 hours of sleep, based on, you know, how much I've had to drink and how long ago that occurred.
Wow.
So it's a profound impact, and that's so the sleep tracker has been beneficial for me because of that feedback loop. But this has been very much inspired by conversations we've had on this show with Dr. Russell Foster, a leading sleep expert, and longevity guru Peter Attia, who was just on the show, author of the colossal bestseller Outlive. I think it might be worth sharing here my exchange with Peter.
If I have 2 glasses of wine at 6 p.m. and go to bed at 10 p.m., I sleep pretty well. If I have 2 glasses of wine at 9 p.m. and go to bed at 11 p.m., I sleep really poorly. Pretty obvious implication here, which is
right.
You can be mindful about how you use this thing to your advantage and sort of shield yourself from some of the harm of it. So to me, that's like what I would call sort of the nuanced approach to that.
And actually, like, an open question is, how much of the negative impacts of alcohol on our health is due to negative impact on sleep? I don't know how, when we look at those studies, how we can tease those two things apart.
I don't think there is a way retrospectively. I've talked about this with some folks who are kind of interested in this question as I am. And I think the only thing we've ever been able to come up with is you would have to study this question prospectively to really tease apart these different things. I don't know who would fund such a study, but if an entity was willing to put up the money to do a 5-year study, we could really get some insights here.
Well, I have to think quite a few people would be interested in funding such a study, and I'm hopeful that'll come together. You know, Slingerland makes this point that there are 2 things about how we drink today that are radically different from how we drank during most of our 20,000-year history of drinking. The first is that we have access to much more concentrated alcohol compared with our history. This really only happened in the last few centuries. And the second is that we drink alone in ways that we never did historically. And, you know, frankly, when I think about it, you know, I have 3 kids, 13, 16, 19. The thing I most worry about with my kids is drinking too much and doing something stupid. It's literally like the number one fear that I have, and I think I'm not alone. So I think that's indicative of how serious the downsides of drinking are for us individually and collectively.
What kind of conversations, if you're comfortable sharing, Rufus, have you had with your kids about sort of like what's been your parental advice to them about how to navigate drinking?
My wife and I have this view that judgment and knowledge of what your kids are doing are inversely correlated. So we'd rather be less judgmental and have full, transparent conversations about exactly what they're doing. And I've encouraged them to experiment, enjoy the different social opportunities with their friends, but just never, ever, ever get behind the wheel of an automobile, having had anything to drink, or with another driver who's had anything to drink. And from my perspective, Caleb, the self-driving cars can't come fast enough.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Absolutely.
Shall we drink to the self-driving cars?
All right, let's toast to that. Today's episode was edited by me, Caleb Bissinger, and sound designed by Mike Toda.
The Next Big Idea is a proud member of the LinkedIn Podcast Network. I'm Rufus Griscom. See you next week.
Alcohol, my permanent accessory. Alcohol.